Octavia's Incredible Music Room Adventures. 88 Reasons to Stay Out of the Piano. Text and music by Susan Calkins. Illustrations by Robin Baird Lewis. Copyright 2020 Octavia's World Publishing. The drumbeat pulsed through Octavia as she peered out from her hiding place. When the djembe drums joined in, she couldn't stand still any longer. Across the room, Mr. Brio marked the tempo and bounced to the beat. The marimbas started playing. Then the kids began singing. Octavia danced and sang right along with them.
We love the sounds of rhythms of Africa. Let's all sing and play a song with rhythms of Africa. Grab a marimba, djembe or xylophone. All together we will play with rhythms of Africa. Dance, shout, let your body move with the rhythm and the groove. Dance, shout, let your body move to the rhythms of Africa.
The third graders had been practicing this song for 3 weeks, and Octavia could tell they were feeling pretty good about this performance. When the song was over, Mr. Brio jumped up and called out, "Great job, folks! How about we do it one more time? Who wants to be the conductor?"
I do.
Me.
No, me. No, me.
Jocko's hand shot up first. "Okay, Jocko. Show me the 4-beat pattern and then come on up here and lead us." Jocko traced the pattern in the air. "Perfect!" exclaimed Mr. Brio as he moved to exchange places with Jocko. "Now, give us 4 beats to set the tempo and, remember, keep it nice and steady." Jocko, the notorious class clown and mischief maker, strutted to the front of the room while his classmates exchanged nervous glances. Why on earth would Mr. Brio choose him? Octavia whispered to herself. I sure hope he doesn't get into trouble for goofing off again. Not today. But much to everyone's surprise, Jocko seemed to be taking it seriously for once. Conducting with one hand and pointing to the bass drummer with the other, he called out, 1, 2, 3, 4. Everyone started right on cue, and Mr. Brio played the drum with a huge grin on his face. Watching all this, Octavia felt a great sense of relief. Jocko's not a bad conductor after all, she thought. I never would have suspected it. When the song was over, the kids all burst into laughter. Yay, Jocko! They shouted, slapping high fives around the room. Caught up in the excitement, Octavia couldn't help but hop up and down and clap her hands. Great job! Exclaimed Mr. Brio. But now, my friends, it's time to put the instruments away and line up. With a brisk snap of his fingers, he announced, Let's see how quickly you can do it. Mr. Astor, the third-grade teacher, walked into the room while the students were shuffling around, putting things away. Hello, Mr. A. They were fantastic today. Mr. Brio belted out, holding 2 thumbs up. "I think we're finally ready for next week's concert." The kids lined up behind Mr. Astor. "Okay, ladies and gents, let's get back and finish up those social studies projects," he said. They filed out the door, and Mr. Brio called out into the hallway after them. "How about practicing the 4-beat conducting pattern as you march back to your classroom?" Octavia wouldn't have chosen any other room in the school for her nest. It's not the safest location for a little spider, but she just loves music. She's learning so much from Mr. Brio's lessons, and the students make her laugh. If the kids aren't around, Mr. Brio's in the room, working at his desk or practicing the piano. At night, the school custodian, Mr. Williker, comes in with the vacuum cleaner. A terrifying piece of machinery, according to Octavia. She tries to stay out of sight whenever humans are around, but having to hide all the time does make Octavia wonder, why are people so afraid of me? Am I really that creepy looking? Today's 3rd grade music class, the song they played, Jocko's conducting, even Mr. Brio's silly jokes had lifted her spirits. But now they were gone, and she was alone again. "I'll never have any friends," she exclaimed, letting out a deep sigh.
I'm just a little creature, not like other children in the school. But I would love to show them just how much I have to share. Maybe I can somehow make them understand just who I am. I could be a musician. How I want to sing and play. They're so afraid of what I might do. I wish they could see that I'm afraid too. I'm a little creature, not like all the rest. I know it's true, but I would love to show them just how much I have to share.
Though she may be small, Octavia is intelligent and industrious. When it came to building her nest, she wanted it to have an excellent view of the music room. After a careful search, she discovered just the spot, a well-hidden corner at the back of the xylophone shelf. From her cozy nest, she can watch over the room, yet remain always hidden in the shadows. As far as she can tell, no one in the room would ever suspect that she's there and watching everything. If Octavia could just stay in her nest, she'd never be in any real danger. But unfortunately, she's too keen and impatient. Definitely not a homebody. With an adventurous spirit and a curious nature, she takes way too many risks for her own good. This is precisely what gets her into trouble. Having 8 legs, Octavia can jump very high and climb up any surface. She can roll into a ball and slip into the tiniest space within a fraction of a second. But the coolest thing of all is the way she can spin a silk dragline and glide gracefully down from the shelf to the floor or suspend herself in mid-air. She may be shy around humans, but Octavia feels invincible. She likes to pretend she's a bold explorer, venturing out into a magnificent land of musical instruments. Mr. Brio, like many humans, is afraid of spiders. He wouldn't think twice about sweeping one out the door, or even worse, squishing a creature like Octavia. She shudders at the thought. But she never really worried too much about what might happen if she found herself face to face with Mr. Brio. The way she saw it, he was simply the greatest music teacher of all time. She couldn't even imagine that he'd ever try to harm her. One fine spring afternoon, though, a nearly disastrous encounter with him made her realize that she needed to be much more cautious. Here is what happened. The students had gone out with the science teacher for the school's annual Forest Friends Nature Walk. Mr. Brio had left in a hurry, mumbling to himself about being late for a teacher's meeting. Octavia was suddenly left with the room all to herself. Gazing out from her nest, she caught sight of the baby grand piano across the room. It makes such beautiful sounds. How does it work? She wondered. It seemed to her like this was the perfect opportunity to go investigate. Without another thought, she spun a silk thread and slid down from the xylophone shelf to the floor, then skittered across the room towards the piano. With almost no effort, she managed to climb up one of its wooden legs. Reaching the top, she jumped onto the keyboard. Octavia was delighted. She hopped merrily across the black keys, turned around, and bounced back towards the high notes, singing,
Do, re, mi, sol, la, do.
But no matter how hard she landed on the keys, the piano didn't make a sound. This was very disappointing. How can it be? Mr. Brio plays so effortlessly. And I can't get one single note out of it. The top of the baby grand was propped open. She decided to take a look. One big leap, and she was inside. Rows and rows of metal strings, she marveled. It didn't take Octavia very long at all to figure out how it actually worked. A finger strikes a key. The key triggers a hammer. The hammer hits a group of strings, making them vibrate, and voila! Sound waves! She reasoned. Remembering how Mr. Brio had explained this to the 5th graders. It was easy for her to see that the strings of the piano were arranged in rows that got progressively longer and fatter. She'd always wondered why this instrument had such an odd shape. It was starting to make sense to her, though, when she remembered hearing the violin teacher tell students, "The shorter the string, the higher the pitch." Making her way towards the low notes, Octavia sang,
Do, ti, la, sol, fa, mi, re, do.
as she looked around in amazement. Walking over strings was a bit challenging. She had to pay attention to avoid falling through the gaps. The sound of footsteps brought Octavia's singing to an abrupt end. Someone is entering the music room. I must have lost track of time. She panicked and froze in an arched position with all 8 feet clinging to the strings. Shifting her eyes to peer out from the dark interior, she could see Mr. Brio approaching the piano. The frightened little creature didn't move a muscle as he sat down on the piano bench and placed his music on the stand. His face was so close to her now that she could hear him breathing. Her heart pounded and she tried to focus her thoughts on an escape. What should I do? Where should I go? Before she could do anything, though, Mr. Brio lifted his arms, flexed his fingers, and struck some very loud chords. The vibration of the strings set off shock waves of sound, sending her flying several inches into the air. She didn't manage to land on the strings. Instead, she fell between them and ended up on the soundboard below, unharmed but terribly shaken up. Wooden hammers were striking the strings at a wild pace, and Mr. Brio played on. The vibrations in the soundboard traveled from her feet and through her entire body. It felt like the floor was buzzing with electricity. "I need to make a run for it," she cried out loud. Now, deep inside the piano, Octavia couldn't see Mr. Brio anymore. It seemed to her that her only option was to jump with enough force to make it all the way out and onto the floor. She could only hope that he'd be so busy playing that he wouldn't notice her soaring past his head. Then she'd have to make a dash for the safety of her nest. Suddenly, the music stopped. He must be looking at the notes, she thought. This is my chance. Summoning all her effort, Octavia took a huge leap that sent her flying between 2 strings and rocketing through the air. Instead of falling on the floor like she'd planned, she landed on one of the white keys, just 1 note away from Mr. Brio's pinky finger. "Oh, geez!" he yelled, pushing himself away from the keyboard and knocking over the piano bench. He grabbed his sheet music and swatted at the keys. Octavia leaped to the floor, barely avoiding his blow. Mr. Brio bent over to pick up the piano bench, and she made a beeline to the bookshelf. In a flash, she shimmied up to the top shelf and behind a fat book about Beethoven, then curled herself into a tight ball. She could hear Mr. Brio panting and the crinkling of paper as he tried to smooth out his wrinkled music. Octavia told herself to take deep breaths as she tried to calm her pounding heart. Mr. Brio started playing again, but Octavia was too afraid to move. She remained curled in that ball for hours. It wasn't until much later, when school was out and he'd gone home for the night, that she finally stretched out her aching limbs, climbed out from behind the book, and hightailed it back to her nest. Safely at home, Octavia reflected on what had happened that day. She could have been upset with Mr. Brio for trying to hurt her, but she knew he had reacted so harshly because he was truly afraid of her. He's not a bad person, she thought, but from now on, I do need to be more careful when he's around. Exhausted, yet content, she settled down into her nest, thinking about how incredible it had been, experiencing music from the inside of a piano, and how much fun she'd had making music with the third graders, singing softly to herself, "We love the sounds of rhythms of Africa." It didn't take long before Octavia had dozed off. A grand piano has 88 keys, one for each musical note. That also means it has 88 wooden hammers.